Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, here in Silicon Valley at 11th Cloud Expo. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're following this lunchtime panel out there on the World Wide Web. I'm not going to moderate this one. Isn't that excellent? I get to listen, and I'll also facilitate if we go to Q&A. I'm actually going to hand this over. This is a Chris Kemp panel, and the first ever panel, I believe, in the history of humanity, powered by Openstack. I say no more. Over to you, Chris.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. So what I wanted to do is really just kick things off and talk a little bit about where Openstack came from and its roots. Originally, we didn't have this many people involved. This roughly represents the number of companies that have more than one individual contributor registered as part of Openstack. If you kind of dive in a little bit more and you look at who's kind of gone to the openstack.org website and committed to the project, the list gets smaller. There are companies that have gone in and actually made financial contributions to the project. We're not going to talk about any of this today, however. We're not going to talk about the sponsorships. We're actually going to talk about Openstack, where it came from, how it's being used today. And I'm really honored to have some folks here on stage with me from companies like WebEx and eBay and PayPal. And these are gentlemen who are actually responsible for driving the adoption of Openstack in their organizations. And I'm going to take most of the time today talking about what they're doing with Openstack and the opportunities to use Openstack to do new things. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about where Openstack came from, because I think it's important to note that when I was at NASA and when the folks at Rackspace started working on the first lines of code in this project, we were, in fact, users. NASA's mission was, in fact, to explore the solar system, not to write open source code. And that mission often required that we take lots of data and process it and turn it into huge data sets that we would share with platforms like Google and the Google Earth project. We had a similar collaboration where we took hundreds of terabytes of data from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that preceded the mission to Mars and created a 3D map of Mars. And we needed infrastructure that could take all that information, that data, process it, and serve it up to platforms like this. And so at NASA, I very much wanted to take some off-the-shelf technology and just use it. I didn't want to build a whole cloud infrastructure to solve these problems. We tried some of the off-the-shelf technologies that were available a few years ago. The eucalyptus tree there was an unsteady branch for us in the early days, but we worked really hard, and we had companies like Cisco partner with us, and we brought in some really disruptive infrastructure, shipping containers with really pioneering approaches to putting really high-density compute and storage on our facilities. We started taking open source code snippets, pulling them together into a platform that really mimicked a lot of the operational characteristics of Amazon, and it was for our internal users. And we really believed that we couldn't do it ourselves. And when I started talking to the folks at Rackspace, they also believed that they were in the fanatical support business. And they wanted to really focus on the things that they were good at. And I knew that with the support we had at NASA, the best we could do is kick this thing off. We wouldn't be able to sustain the investment in the technology platform to keep it going. So really what I want to kind of segue into the next conversation with is the federal government, though it spends $90 billion a year on IT, had a cloud strategy because it realizes that it's not good at that. It's not good at creating infrastructure and operating infrastructure. And platforms like usaspending.gov would not have existed if we didn't have very inexpensive cloud web scale infrastructure at the disposal of the White House when they wanted to do this project. And we very much, at the time, were excited about turning this technology loose to a community, and we're really excited that the first slide has so many companies behind it. But at the end of the day, Openstack emerged out of the needs of a few companies trying to solve problems. And as a former NASA CTO and as somebody who worked really hard on the project, I'm delighted that the users are able to finally start to take the technology and build really compelling products and services based on it. NASA was a private cloud, Rackspace is a public cloud, and I think that's represented in Openstack, which is I think one of the most exciting open source projects we've seen in a long time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transition into a conversation with the folks here on the stage. I'm going to start with Saran Mander, who runs infrastructure, and he's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing with OpenStack. So I'm going to actually just ask that question. What are you doing with OpenStack? Who are you, and what are you doing with OpenStack these days? So, Saran?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So currently, as I'll actually just take it out where Chris started, our intent from a PayPal perspective is we want to enable our business. We want to let them succeed in any new products and actually let them innovate. And from our perspective, our intent is any new customer-facing application from a web-facing infrastructure we want to build on this OpenStack. So that is what we are planning to do at a high level. And I'll let JC and Reinhardt take it.
So from the eBay side, even though we are the same company, it happens that we are not sharing much of our infrastructure. So we have two efforts that are going eventually to combine into a bigger OpenStack effort at eBay. But from the marketplace, eBay marketplace side, we are running already most of our infrastructure in our legacy cloud, I would call it, even if I don't know if there's such a thing as a legacy cloud, but it's built on software that we developed. And in the same way, NASA is not in the business of developing open source. eBay is not really in the business of building clouds either, right? Cloud software. So what we did is we looked at what is the open source ecosystem and how can we adopt a platform to build our internal cloud. And we looked at several options from proprietary vendor solutions to other competing open source projects. And really the determining factor for us to select OpenStack was the size and the energy of the community. To give you an experience we had recently when we started is that every developer wanted to have a patch in OpenStack, like just to have their contributor name in the contributor list. But by the time we found the bug, we were ready to submit the patch. Someone would have already fixed the bug. So really, for us, it's a win-win solution. We can focus on the added value that we can put on top of the open source, either contributing software ourselves or pushing the community in the right direction to make sure that it addresses our needs and other users' needs, and focusing ourselves on the upper layers, like for example, application management or application remediation, things that are core to our business, and not so much what is the common denominator, which is infrastructure as a service.
Excellent. And Reinhardt?
So like eBay and PayPal, we're in the business of delivering software applications over the web. We have about a 12-year history in developing this and delivering this SaaS application everybody knows as WebEx, web conferencing. So we have a very complicated, some would say convoluted environment that's grown up over a number of years. And what we, like a lot of organizations, I think we find that the infrastructure and the thing that we're deploying our applications against was anything but agile. And so as our development teams were adopting agile development methodology where they were spinning new releases on a much quicker cycle than operations could actually deliver. And so fundamentally what we were looking to do with the cloud infrastructure overall was to match an agile operations infrastructure with our agile development, and so that we could get things out much more quickly. And so ultimately when we looked around, one of the interesting things is we have some special needs in our world that prevent us from going to a public cloud. Things like connecting to the analog world with telephony bridges and video transcoders, things like that. They're quite special to our environment, yet we want all the advantages of a cloud infrastructure. So as we look at the cloud market and understand our actual infrastructure needs beyond those are not that different from anybody else's. So to be able to take an off-the-shelf, vibrant community, as JC mentioned, and actually leverage that to solve that big chunk of our problem that's the same as everybody else's, yet be able to extend it and adopt these narrow edge cases that are special to us was really what drove us to OpenStack.
Now, JC, you touched on this a little bit, but can you expand a little bit on how you selected OpenStack as a platform? Obviously, your organizations have very different infrastructures.
Yeah, so we actually started looking at a cloud platform just over a year ago now. And I think one of the, when we looked at kind of the ecosystem that was out there, there were a couple things that attracted us to OpenStack as opposed to some of the other ones, the Eucalyptuses, the Cloud.coms at the time. The first was just the vibrant community, as JC mentioned. It was very clear that this was a community that was building momentum very, very quickly. And with momentum comes features and bug fixes and community documentation, and there's just a lot of stuff around a community that's very, very important beyond the technology. The second thing is that Cisco as a whole, the mothership, as it were, was making an investment in OpenStack as well. And so it made it a very safe choice for us from a corporate support viewpoint. It was something that Cisco was actively involved in quantum and pushing that forward, and it was a meeting of the minds where we can meet both of our goals.
And JC, anything beyond the community from a technology perspective that?
So for us, strangely, the technology was kind of foreign. It was one of the issues in selecting OpenStack. eBay is a Java shop. We have mostly Java developers. And going to a platform that is mostly Python is still something that is hard for us. But I think that when you look at the population that is going to develop and use the platform, Python is maybe making more sense than Java. So I would not say that this was the first selection criteria for us. We are pleased to see some evolution in scale and manageability, availability. I think there's still some work in some areas, but we are very pleased with the current state. So overall, I don't know if I answered exactly your question, but technology was not a deciding factor. But the community and the feature set and the future was more important for us.
Yeah. So I'll just add on to just a couple of things that JC and Reinhard mentioned. One of actually guiding principles that we had was no vendor lock-in. That does not mean that nobody can participate in it. The participation normalization was, hey, contributed back to the community. The ecosystem played a big part. And the other thing that was actually extremely helpful for us is we can actually take any of our smart engineers, and they're not going to have a steep learning curve from a proprietary technology perspective. Majority of the documentation, including the blueprints, it can be actually accessed on the web. And the other thing is, a concrete example from our side is just extending what JC said, is there was a bug. One of my engineers actually mentioned within 45 minutes of him actually posting, they actually had a reply back. They actually tested it as part of the CI, and they were able to deploy it.
Yeah. So each of you have mentioned this, the community engagement and fixing things. Have you found OpenStack to be a reliable platform to build your infrastructure on top of?
Yeah, I'll kick off. As of now, we are actually starting out, we are taking a greenfield approach, and any of our new applications, we don't want to target our legacy infrastructure because there is a lot of challenges that we want to tackle, but this is our future platform. From that perspective, the stability actually has been fairly reliable for us. The code has been extremely clean. The development processes that the community is also driving, I think it has been a safe bet for us from what we have experienced so far.
So the experience is the same. To give you a bit of background on how we are using the current OpenStack deployment, we are turning this to developers to experiment. What it means is they are trying very crazy things. Like there's one guy who created a 16-node application that is processing real-time events. They are pushing the limits in terms of platform, and so far they are very happy. We are very happy with the stability and the availability. So I would say that within that envelope, we are very pleased with the current state.
So our delivery platform is actually fairly simple, and we've intentionally kept it that way, where we've kind of really limited the scope. We've targeted a specific application that we needed to get to beta quickly, and we actually delivered just what was necessary to deliver that application. I'm happy to say for that application, and the environment has been 100% stable for them since we went live on July 31st. For the Nova platform for us, and so our experience has been very clean around exposing just those features we need, test those features we need, and say yes, those are stable, those are happy. I know that as you start pushing some of the envelopes, like in our router test lab where they're trying to set up machines with really wacky networking interfaces, network configurations, yeah, they're breaking things and fixing things. I'm just glad they're doing it before I have to.
Yep. each of you mentioned the ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit more about the companies in the OpenStack ecosystem that have contributed to your successful implementation of OpenStack and how they're helping you succeed?
Yeah, the one thing that we actually used is we also used a service provider that actually helped us because we actually had a fairly aggressive timelines. So from that ecosystem perspective, they were able to actually directly help us as we were ramping things up. The key thing is, from our perspective, agility is key. So our time to market, not just from a product perspective, but also from an infrastructure perspective. So I think that ecosystem actually helped us. The other thing that we are also doing is talking to our vendors. Now, it's actually an amazing discussion when we are actually telling them, hey, are you compatible with OpenStack standards? And initially, when we actually talked about this maybe 9 months ago, there was a little bit of a, I would say, what are you talking about? We don't know how it's going to pan out. But now I actually talked to one of our key vendors maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the response was extremely positive, and they want to contribute back because they realize not only are we going to help in an existing customer, but we actually have a potential for actually a broader market and actually help the overall ecosystem.
Excellent.
So for us, the only vendor really we are working with right now is Nicira from, or VMware from a network virtualization point of view. And it was kind of the deciding factor also for us to go with OpenStack. It's their tight integration with OpenStack and the out-of-the-box experience of deploying Nicira with OpenStack without any kind of itch. So I would say that going forward, that's a model that we want to replicate. When we are looking at technologies, we will also, like Saran was mentioning, request integration with the OpenStack components and make sure that this also gives us a generic API to access their features. So for example, with VMware and Nicira, we are not using directly their controllers API, but we are using the Quantum APIs, which means that down the line, if we want to switch vendors, there's no vendor lock-in. So that's a critical part of why we are also adopting OpenStack.
Yeah, so we also have put a strong emphasis on avoiding vendor lock-in, and in particular, sticking with clean APIs. When we talk to a storage vendor, an object storage vendor, for example, we will only talk Swift to them. There's nothing else that we'll talk because it's avoiding that's a big important. We also had an aggressive timeline. I mean, to go from selecting OpenStack towards the end of October to POC in February to beta launch of the product in July, we couldn't have done that alone. So we actually did use Mirantis, in fact, as a consultancy. One of the benefits, one of the things that we did with them was everything that we did together in terms of deployment scripts, automation, monitoring. All this stuff is. The stipulation was everything we did could be contributed back to the community, and so we're working to get that stuff out as we go along. But besides the technical details of launching this stuff, I think it's fair to call out other parts of the community that also helped us leverage that. For example, I haven't written a lick of user documentation yet. I've pointed my users, i.e. my tenants who are using the platform, at, frankly, some of our competitors' websites, and they use their documentation. It works just fine with ours. So that's been a benefit for us, pretty significant benefit.
As you look into the future, there's obviously an ecosystem out there taking everything from ARM chips and GPUs and trying to. There's an effort right now to run ARM-based OpenStack on the TriStack project, all the way up the stack to the systems integrators that you talked about assisting in your implementation, storage companies, the networking companies like Nicira. What opportunities do you see in the future for a lot of the folks perhaps in this room that are working on products that are integrating with OpenStack? What are the biggest opportunities as customers you see for the ecosystem to go in and fill gaps and make OpenStack better?
Yeah, I think the opportunities are tremendous. I think the one thing would be if you don't embrace OpenStack, I think it might be something that might not be advantageous based on the momentum that it's actually getting. There are actually a lot of different opportunities because from our perspective, we are in the business of actually allowing our customers to enable payments anywhere the way they want. We are not in a business of actually making sure we have the best cloud. So our goal is, if somebody is actually doing tremendous amount of monitoring, the way you actually manipulate the infrastructure from top to bottom, right? If somebody is actually adding a value add, if they're giving us, I think the key thing, I think some of my colleagues pointed out is having a standard RESTful APIs, as long as we actually embrace that, I think if somebody provides a value add, it'll be silly on our side not to leverage that. And we are willing to pay money for it.
Yeah, so I agree that there's a lot of opportunities for vendors, mostly all the legacy vendors that are doing storage or network equipment and other components to embrace some of the APIs that OpenStack is offering. The other opportunity, I think, is we are kind of power users because we are building our cloud. I don't think that it's possible for a small, medium enterprise to do that. I would say that down the line, there might be like a packaged version of OpenStack with some hardware following some very well-defined blueprint that would help smaller companies to deploy their own cloud. And I think that's like a second tier of offerings than what we have seen today, which is mostly building like larger cloud.
Yeah, to those I'll add that if you look at the cloud ecosystem as a whole, or in particular at the gorilla in the room, AWS, there are a tremendous number of services that go beyond your basic infrastructure services. There are database services, message queues, workflow engines, load balancers, DNS, Route 53. There's an enormous number of additional services that kind of fill out the picture of things that you might want to use to deploy your web application. And so there's an enormous opportunity around those layers as well. No single company will be able to build all of those things themselves. And so to actually be able to plug and play, particularly those upper layers, but use common APIs, use common auth through Keystone, for example, across these would be hugely beneficial to us to kind of round out the picture.
Yeah. You know, I think you're all very lucky to have some of the finest engineering teams in the world. You know, if you think about eBay and WebEx and PayPal, you know, not every business in the world has access to the kind of engineering talent you do. You've all made the decision to take OpenStack right from the website, right from openstack.org, and download it from GitHub, and really start, you know, embracing its raw source code and building platforms and powering your applications based on that raw technology. How do you see other public cloud offerings fitting into this, the services that you're powering on your private on-premise OpenStack clouds, and how also do you see you know, the rest of your enterprise maybe consuming other OpenStack products that don't have your engineering teams, you know, building that core technology?
Yeah. So the way I look at it, I think it's going to be a ubiquitous platform, right? And I think down the road we will actually be leveraging a hybrid cloud solution, right? We will be using private and public approach as we go forward. There might be some logistics as we go through it, but I think to our end users, I think that's where the importance of APIs are actually going to come in, because I think there's going to be some sort of a logic where we can actually provide that to say, if workload equal X, then go private. If workload equal Y, go public. But I think from that perspective, I think that's where the standards, the open standards, actually become extremely relevant, because if you want to expand internationally, rather than us buying a brand new data center or do this, there might be an option, depending on the use case, that we actually go with some of the partners in the ecosystem where our end users don't really realize which is our developers, whether it's public or private, because they're responsible for writing, innovating products, and we need to worry about how do we actually provide them with the ubiquitous platform.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly what Saran is saying. And in addition, the benefit of OpenStack is that there will be many different providers offering the same APIs. So for example, we already have a Rackspace, Dreamhost, HP, and some others. So again, to our motto, which is no vendor lock-in, it's a good ecosystem for us, because instead of having only like AWS or Azure and you're locked in their APIs and their platform, we have the opportunity to select who our provider is based on cost or SLAs or other criteria.
Excellent.
So we have, we're primarily, as an operations team, we're responsible for running that production platform that things are running on. And I think there's enormous opportunity, in particular for certain QA, certain load generation and test, certain things that need to live outside of our security perimeter for various reasons, particularly during the dev cycle, where we can actually leverage external services. Now, part of that is leveraging third-party services, third-party clouds for hosting those types of workloads. The second part of it is taking our own platform, what we're deploying in our production environment, and propagate that out to the rest of the team, whether it's moving upstream in the OpenStack Cisco edition stuff that goes out to the community at large, or whether it is just our packaging plopped into our China QA lab or into our telephony lab in another location. We're actually propagating that outside of our walls as well. It's actually, for us, it's a world of not one big mega cloud, but lots of little clouds. And we have regulatory and policy and various other reasons that kind of have us building little clouds that have different characteristics.
So you see, in an ideal world, perhaps different OpenStack's the foundation with its API support, but there are really secure clouds or really high performance clouds, really, and you're able to move applications into the most. So along those lines, APIs have come up throughout the conversation. Two-part question. Part one is, as long as OpenStack compatibility from an API perspective is provided by a vendor, is that sufficient to address your concerns around lock-in as it evolves? And then the second question is, to what extent do these APIs that exist today provide what you need for your applications to make intelligent decisions about where to run workloads, and where are there opportunities to kind of further extend the APIs?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the places where we have pushed the boundary a little bit on OpenStack, some changes that we've done to the scheduler for co-locating block storage and compute workloads, for example. Now in order to accomplish that, we have to, the only way we're deploying stuff is through the API, and so we have to extend the API a little bit so that we can pass this information in. Is that unique to us? Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll contribute it back within days here and get it out everywhere else. But we actually, part of using OpenStack for us is to be able to do those kinds of things and meet these specific requirements, hopefully get them out to the community, but in the meantime solve a problem I have right now. So back to your question about if I were buying a distribution from a specific vendor that didn't give me the flexibility to do that, that's going to be a problem for us. We're going to have to, we have to be able to do that type.
So it's APIs and pluggability.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that the extensibility of the APIs would allow vendors to differentiate themselves, but every users will have to figure out if this is locking them into one specific implementation of OpenStack, or because if you really want to be able to switch from one vendor to the other one, you need to stay with the core APIs and try to diverge as little as possible. So I think that there's opportunity for both, and it's what's great with the platform.
Okay. Sran?
Yeah, so I think the key is flexibility, right? I think as long as we get the flexibility, I think the key thing is right now we can actually look under the hoods. I think agility comes in fairly quick for us, similar to the use case that he mentioned, rather than us waiting for vendors to actually respond back to us. If we just have that flexibility, and the key thing is if you're getting a value add from any of the vendors that we actually have, we're not going to just switch for the sake of switching. Because at the end of the day, it is a switching cost that is an overhead for us, right? So I think that's where, but at least we have the flexibility, and that's going to be key for future.
Excellent. So one question, and I think I'm going to reach out to the folks in the room and maybe ask a few questions, and then engage and have Jeremy carry some mics around. But the last formal question that I wanted to ask was, as you look to the future, if you were to fast forward 3 or 4 or 5 years and look at the way PayPal, WebEx, Cisco is using OpenStack within the organization, could you kind of paint us a picture of what the infrastructure looks like? I guess starting with PayPal.
Yeah, from my perspective, right now the pain point is our provisioning for newer infrastructure takes months. I would like that not to be an issue. I would like people to actually think of infrastructure as just picking up the phone and saying, the dial tone is there. So that's the one thing I would actually aspire for, that we don't talk about the actual infrastructure. We are actually more concerned about how do we actually launch a new product in hours, right? Right now it actually takes a lot of time, and infrastructure is one component. So I think that would be the one thing from a high level that I would actually aspire us to be.
So for us, in the next 2 or 3 years, the goal is to convert our legacy cloud, as I mentioned, to OpenStack. And this will mean having more production use case and different type of use case that today are not typically supported by cloud, like search clusters or Hadoop infrastructure. So that's the next frontier for us.
Thanks.
Yeah, like JC, I think you will see an expansion where we've targeted kind of specific designed for the cloud applications today. You'll see that expanding to more and more applications as capabilities of the platform, capabilities of our deployment methods kind of expand. I think that's kind of the biggest thing you'll see is an expansion in the types of loads that we'll take on into that space. I think the second, kind of touch on a conversation I was having with Jeff just before this thing, is the second thing that we'll see is that today, the cloud infrastructure and the way we deploy applications is there's a bit of an impedance mismatch between our existing security policies, our existing deployment policies, and so streamlining those things will go more towards our ability to deploy cloud applications than actually the infrastructure changes that are required. There's a lot of policy, politics, other things that will change to embrace kind of cloud deployments and cloud.
Excellent. I guess one question, maybe by show of hands I could ask is, how many of you in the audience today are organizations which are consuming OpenStack to power some application or service by show of hands? Cool. And then how many of you are building products that integrate with OpenStack or have companies that are engaged in the OpenStack initiative? It's pretty good. And then how many of you aren't doing anything with OpenStack today, either consuming it or integrating with it at this point? Okay, so I'd say my rough estimate is about 60% not, and about 20 and 20. You're either consuming OpenStack as a customer or you're building products that augment OpenStack. So I guess what I'd like to do is, Jeremy has a microphone here. I wanted to just open it up to the audience. We have about 8 minutes or so. Any questions you have about OpenStack or about the implementations these gentlemen are working on?
Hi. Can you give some examples of how not the vendors, not the device vendors, but say third-party companies can augment or develop products to help you guys? A couple of examples.
So I think some of our needs of the future that we would actually like to get to fairly soon is, maybe what Reinhard was saying is actually how do we actually provide more functionality? Right now, we actually have a limited functionality from the highest frequency use cases. So moving forward, how do we actually just provide database as a service? That's a need, right? How do we actually provide routing as a service, right? So there are a lot of other technical components, especially from our side, that we're just going to keep expanding. And from our perspective, there's only going to be one way of delivering infrastructure service, which is going to be cloud/OpenStack. So anything else will be a painful process, but if you actually follow OpenStack, it'll actually be minutes. So there are tons of opportunities.
JC?
Yeah, in addition to what Saran said, again, there's some area, like for example in networking, where you have load balancers, you have firewalls, you have many devices that today are not directly integrated with OpenStack. They cannot be managed or offered as a service, really, for end users. I think that there's an opportunity to build services on top of those and expose them to cloud users. This is starting with like DNS or load balancer management and things like that. So I think it's going to accelerate. We've seen first the waves of storage vendors adopting OpenStack. So I guess there's still a lot of those, like you take any data center components and you think about how can you make it a service offered through OpenStack.
Yeah, if you think about any deployment of software, if you think about, there's the actual instantiating of the physical or the virtual machines and launching that image, but anything that thing touches, the ones that we've mentioned already, load balancers, DNS, there's other less obvious things like certificates. I need to generate certificates dynamically and bring those in. Very simple, fairly compact little thing, and if I could buy a lot of these things instead of building it, I'd be very happy because it would accelerate our deployments. I think there's also there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be done around in the community around monitoring and event correlation and things that are happening more at the application. And effectively, one of the exciting things to us about OpenStack as a private cloud is that I can provide visibility to my application teams, both at the application tier and the infrastructure tier. When you're running in Amazon, you can't see what's happening in the infrastructure. Well, the ability to measure those things doesn't mean that I can correlate them yet. And there's a lot of work to be done around that event correlation, things that we can do to improve that. And I think there's a lot of room for innovation across the stack.
Cool. And hey, quick question, Reinhardt, would you like to see similar visibility in your private on-premise cloud and a public cloud, so that when you move an application, it's not a black box when you move it to public cloud? Is that an area?
Yeah, that would be pretty. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, those of us who've had to run database services in Amazon, for example, you have no idea what's going on. And so if I'm going to do, I hate to use the buzzword, but if I'm going to do cloud bursting or move workloads across private public, a lot of the things that I'm getting used to in my private cloud, I sure would like to extend those.
It's an opportunity for OpenStack. Other questions? Yep, over here.
Where are you looking?
Hi. Since we all know that security is very important in the cloud, have you guys investigated this with OpenStack at all? And do you have any results so far with this?
Well, I can take that. So one of the main reasons why we are using a network virtualization is to implement this isolation. So there is some solutions that are coming that will allow the definition of overlay network, which I don't know that at this point they are proven to be secure, but they are a good step in the right direction for having isolated workloads. It's even going beyond what, for example, AWS can provide today.
Yeah, I think it is definitely security is high in our mind as we do our deployments. I think as a private cloud vendor, there's a couple of things that we can take advantage of. For example, the control plane is an inside thing. It's not accessible outside. The public cloud vendors don't have that advantage. You mentioned security, and that we're a single vendor, single cloud, but we actually do use multi-tenancy so that we can isolate and create these failure domains within our environment, and we do make use of that. The fact that the Swift API, for example, is exposed at places like Rackspace gives us a lot of confidence that there's a lot of eyeballs on that we can leverage. And if I had developed something myself that I was exposing, I wouldn't have nearly that level of confidence that there's, in the security world, open visibility is a key thing, and I think we get a lot of that from the community.
Yeah, so I think security is definitely key, and at least in our current implementation, right now it's actually behind our private firewalls and within our private network. But our goal is to actually provide a logical isolation that is actually better than our models today. But I think some of that technology is evolving, and we are actually keeping an eye on that. That's extremely high on our mind.
Final question is from over here, I think.
Okay. One of the biggest challenges that most of us face is, we have a lot of legacy applications that are running in either colo centers or in data centers of our own, right? To start with what you guys are doing right now, it looks like it's all greenfield rollouts. How do we bridge legacy ones? Reinhardt had actually brought in a good point about how do you use media gateways, or how do you use encoders, video encoders in your area. How did you bridge that from cloud to the traditional equipment?
So the short and simple answer is we deploy them right alongside the virtual infrastructure. So we use OpenStack's VLAN networking model, for example. And so when we deploy a tenant, we have the ability to drop a physical box on the same VLAN in the same data center right adjacent to those boxes. Now those physical boxes aren't managed in the same way, and one of the things that we look forward to in the future is being able to control the networking that attaches to those, so we can make that more automated. Right now it's pretty manual, but it's also not nearly as manual as calling AT&T and getting a new circuit in. So agility isn't exactly the operative word there. We need to be able to put those boxes in, wire them up to the rest of the network, put them in the same VLAN, and then we can have the front ends that are very dynamic and coming, doing rolling upgrades, that kind of stuff, but it's connecting to these other things that are co-located. So that's fundamentally. To emphasize, we do see today that we are really targeting new applications for this environment. So greenfield to some degree, but that's going to change a lot. I mean, there's a lot of demand, pent-up demand. As people see the agility that the greenfield development gets to see on this new platform, everybody else wants that as well. And so they're moving much more quickly to this platform than we anticipated, frankly.
Excellent. Well, I want to just take a moment to thank JC, Reinhardt, and Saran for sharing what's going on in their organizations. Today, it's not always common you get visibility into how organizations are deploying technology, but I think OpenStack's philosophy of trying to open things up and collaborate with a community of people clearly provides value back to them. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, there's actually an OpenStack user group which is emerging. It's actually the OpenStack Foundation. There's a gentleman named Tim Bell who wasn't able to come out and participate on the panel because we just had him out here a few weeks ago from Switzerland. They're working on a 250,000 core OpenStack deployment at CERN. So it's a really exciting user story. So he's chairing this OpenStack user group, and we're going to be opening that conversation up on the community, and I think there's been some interest in that here as well. So I really encourage you all to join the conversation. Go to openstack.org, download the code, check it out, and engage with the companies that are building products and building services that are based on OpenStack. So
thanks so much,
thank
Chris.
you,
Just a reminder too, obviously OpenStack are there on the show floor. Where are you, Kathy?
Booth number 603, just to the right of the main entrance.
How simple is that? So lots of ways to follow up. Thank these four gentlemen.
thank you.